AI is allowing them to basically put rocket boosters under those opportunistic attacks. And, what may have been taking, 100 days, they can probably do in 100 hours.
Back in May 2024, the McPartland Review was published, an independent assessment commissioned by UK government to explore, amongst other things, how cybersecurity can act as a catalyst for economic growth. It was led by the Right Honourable Stephen McPartland, a four-time elected MP and former Minister for National Security under Boris Johnson's cabinet. In this conversation, Stephen reflects on his unexpected journey into politics, his time as an MP for Stevenage, and what it was really like serving in government during one of the most turbulent political periods in recent memory. We also dive into how the UK stacks up globally when it comes to cyber resilience, the shifting nature of digital threats, and his views on the rise of agentic AI, along with, of course, the key insights from last year's landmark review that he chaired and was subsequently named after him. This is a unique behind-the-scenes look at how government and technology intersect through the lens of innovation, policy, and national security. This is a brilliant conversation. This is the Right Honourable Stephen McPartland. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders Podcast. You're the first ex-government minister to come on to the podcast, and the first MP as well, although we've had Carwyn Jones, the ex-Welsh First Minister, on before, but you're the first national MP. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a great honour to be here and to actually be invited.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've been listening to your keynote at CrestCom this morning, actually, and I've got loads to ask you about, not just about your ministerial career, but also about many other things cybersecurity related. There's so much going on at the moment in the world of AI. Technology innovation is accelerating at an untold rate. But let's start off with the question we always start off with, Stephen. What does good leadership mean to you?
So for me, the best leadership I've seen is when leaders take people with them. So they listen to lots of different points of view and they take people with them. When I've seen bad leadership, that's often been people telling the leaders what they think they want to hear. So for me, it's actually open, collaborative, and taking people with you. That's it for me.
Absolutely. Bringing people on the journey and uniting them behind a common cause, I suppose, is something.
Yeah, and delivering a result, delivering an output, because otherwise that people just sort of sit there and then they essentially just all start agreeing with one another, and then they very confused that reality is quite different. And it's very much like, their then fake idea doesn't really cope with contact with real life. I think the military always talk about how, everybody has great plans, but essentially they go out the window the moment you have contact with the enemy. And I always remember this wonderful quote actually from a boxer, Mike Tyson. And he said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Classic. Yeah, I love that one. I love that. It's so true though, isn't it? So Stephen, you spent over a decade as an MP, including a spell as a minister for national security. What motivated you to enter politics originally?
I was a member of Parliament for 14 years, but I was 33 when I was elected. I was a candidate at just before 30. And I think it's, for me, I come from a background where there's no real interest in politics. My first degree was actually history, and then I have a Master of Science in Technology. But one of the things I noticed was that people who actually created real change, who delivered lasting impressions, that actually happened inside places like Parliament. They're essentially the biggest platforms in the world to create real change. And I always wanted to do things and make a difference. I'm very output driven, and I wanted to help people and stand up for, basically the little person who's struggling against, the man. And I sort of drifted into it that way. And I was surprised as anybody they were interested in me being involved in politics. But one of the things that really struck me is when I won the seat originally back in 2010, nobody expected us to win. We got double the national swing. And it was essentially, I was just out there talking to people and listening. And while I was a member of parliament, that's all the things I did. And I'll probably bore you a little bit about all the different things we did, but we rebuilt schools, hospitals, new platform at the train station, billions in investment, you name it. And it was all driven by what local people wanted. So I was again very surprised that I fought 4 elections and my vote and vote share went up in every single one. And I thought the more they got to know me, the less they'd like me.
You were obviously doing something right.
I know, I've got no idea what it was, but it was just talking and listening to people. And I ran lots of big national campaigns. I was a big rebel. I ran big campaigns around tax credits, helped millions of people, cost the Treasury billions. I did a big one around cladding with a friend of mine. I mean, I did some stuff around the pneumococcal vaccine in Africa. So you could create real massive change. And I think I got into it to do that. And when I was in there, I was doing it. And that was great. I think people often see the negative sides, not the positive sides.
Yeah, of course. I mean, politics is a blood sport, as they say, isn't it? And it's all about criticism and scrutiny. No one ever talks about the positive stuff. But I'm assuming, it sounds like, and I'm not surprised you were involved in mostly very positive things, which I'm sure you're very proud of. But 2 questions in terms of the direction you went in. You're from Liverpool, traditionally a very Labour area. I'm from South Wales, similar to myself. Why did you go in the direction of the Tory party? And the second part of that, why Stevenage?
So the first was in terms of being a Scouse Tory, so to speak, as Liverpool is a collection of wonderful people, and essentially we don't like being told what to do. And I grew up under what you would consider to be militant Labour. So I basically saw what happened in the city in the 80s and early 90s. That was my formative years. And that essentially made me think about freedom and having the right to do the things I wanted to do and not be told what to do. So the Conservatives were the ones who, for me, offered those choices at the time. And so that's why I went in that direction. Stevenage, I was an economic migrant. So I come down to Hertfordshire for work, and Stevenage was on the doorstep. And Stevenage is one of those interesting places. It's the first new town in the country. So it was actually built after the Second World War. And there's an old town which the original A1 runs through. And so you have this really tiny old town, then this massive new town around it. And it builds satellites and missiles and everything else, you name it. It's a very interesting place. And everybody's from somewhere else, really.
It's a bit like Milton Keynes then, is it?
Well, it predates Milton Keynes. So Stevenage was the original first new town. Then you have places like Harlow and some of the others. And then Milton Keynes was probably the latest new town. So essentially, everybody was sort of from somewhere else and had all had this energy and drive to actually do something different.
Yeah.
So it just sort of, I suited them and they suited me.
Looking back now of your political career, what's your proudest achievement, would you say?
I think there was quite a lot. I mean, the asthma inhalers I mentioned, the pneumococcal vaccine in Africa, helping millions of people with tax credits. But I think also the leaseholder campaign, I mean, that helped 5 million people. They were trapped. And we managed to actually get their plight up there on a national level. And not only were we able to help, we actually then got the funds out of the government to actually get rid of this huge issue that a lot of them had. They were just completely trapped and had nowhere to go. And I think actually, I mean, obviously we didn't help everybody, we couldn't, but what we did do was we helped most of them and give everybody hope. And I think as a member of parliament, the thing I always ever wanted to do was to give people hope and give them an output. And I think, that was the one that it took a couple of years, but it really, really did help millions of people and touch lots and lots of lives. I get stopped now. I was checking in at Heathrow Airport the other week to fly somewhere, and the lady on the check-in desk thanked me. And I didn't get upgraded, but I got thanked.
Wow. At least you had there was nice words for you, I suppose.
Exactly.
What lessons from public office have been most useful to you in the work you now do in the private sector?
Oh, wow. Listening. I mean, honestly, when you go into so many rooms, whether it's in business or politics, everybody in there's got an agenda. Everybody in there's either covering the backside, or they want to put something over somebody else, or they want to do this, they want to do that. So I think one of the key things I do is listen, try to understand what's actually going on in the room. And I mean, often people don't want an output, they just want to moan. And some of the things I've learned is if I'm in a room where people just want to moan, I have no interest. So I have this weird little mantra, which is I turn down lots of roles. And I essentially say that I'm only prepared to work with people I like on projects that are interesting. And I learned life was too short.
Yeah, of course. So can I just talk about your ministerial period then? It was a bit of a turbulent time. Can you talk us through how that come about then? How did you get a cabinet role and how it played out and why did it end?
So I never wanted to be a minister. I'd always refused. I really didn't want to do it. So I did the select committee route. So I was actually chair of the Regulatory Reform Select Committee for 4 years. And then I was on the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy for 3 years. And I'd served on other ones previously. So they were the two big ones, So the National Security Strategy, that looks after the architecture, the intelligence services, and holds the National Security Advisor and people like that to account. When I was chair of the Regulatory Reform Select Committee, that's very much around actually regulatory reform orders, which is about a third of all English laws in many ways. And that's often bicameral with the Lords. And I was appointed to that by the members on the committee. And they're all ex-clerks of the House and heads of the civil service and things like that. So it's quite humbling that they felt I was able to do the role. Inside that role, that then put you on the Liaison Select Committee, which holds the Prime Minister to account. So they were the big, powerful roles that I did. And the Minister for National Security, it was a very turbulent time, as you said. There'd been lots of talk about me potentially taking that role for a period. And I think because I was going to be leaving, I wasn't completely opposed to it. And because it's national security and I have an interest, I was very happy to do it. And essentially, we needed to get the National Security Bill through Bill Committee. And there was some bits and pieces in there. And it always tries to be non-political. And I have a good relationship with all sides of the House. So when they needed to make the change, I agreed to step up and do it. So I was asked, and I think in some ways you're voluntold. So I think I agreed. I was happy to do it. And then when the new administration came in, they wanted me to be taking on a slightly different role. And I reminded them that I actually didn't have any interest in being a minister.
Right, okay.
That wasn't my actual interest. So I was happy to do the national security issue to help, but that's all I wanted to do. And so we discussed it. And after a lot of different conversations, as always, in those places, I basically said that I didn't want to continue.
The new leadership you were talking about was when Liz Truss came in, is it? Is that then you left that role upon that?
Yeah, I mean, there was no issues with it. The emergency was over, so basically I'd stepped in to do it out of an emergency. I'd always done other things as well, which I had to give up to take that role on. So I essentially, at the end of it, I was quite happy to be moving forward, and obviously what happened.
Walking away from the melee and the whirlwind, I suppose, back into your everyday role where you can make an impact, I suppose, yeah?
Yeah, and also, it was quite clear what was going to be happening in some ways. And, obviously, then Rishi's people came in, again, had more conversations, and I was just clear that, I was happy to do it if it was necessary, but I didn't want to actually be a minister. My interest was always in making a difference and doing other things. And so it was very intense while I did. It was very interesting. I worked on the National Security Bill and the Economic Crime Bill, and it was wonderful in terms of getting those ready and pushing them through.
Yeah, of course.
But wonderfully interesting. But, I wouldn't want to have lived that life month after month. And I'm quite pleased. I had the honour of doing it briefly, so I've done pretty much every job you could do. So I'm quite lucky.
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to ask you about Boris Johnson. You talk about leadership at the beginning. What was it like working under a colourful character like him? Do you have fond memories of that period? And how would you describe Boris's leadership skills?
He's great at motivating people. He's great at getting people who don't want to be ministers to become ministers.
Evidently, yeah.
Yeah, he'd definitely be able to get you to buy anything you wanted. He is wonderful at that. I think, I worked with 5 different prime ministers. So, there's lots of different roles which are not really seen publicly. So I worked with all 5 different prime ministers on different projects doing different things. And they all had different characteristics. But the one thing that they all had in common is that they were incredibly intelligent. They were actually really quite, now whether they have different views to you or not, I don't think you should ever dismiss how intelligent they are, how quickly they can grasp huge amounts of information. And they were all prepared to make a decision. That's something that most people are not prepared to do. So these people were all prepared to make a decision and go outside in front of a TV camera and talk about it.
I
can't imagine there's that many people in big business around this country are prepared to make a decision right now and then go outside on TV and talk about it and have their career staked to what they just did.
Absolutely. And, there's a lot of armchair critics around, as we know, but very few people would walk a mile in their shoes, realistically, if they knew what was really involved in it. Well,
it's like football, isn't it? We shout, shoot, I can't believe he didn't do that. It's like, mate, you're not even good enough to go on the pitch.
I know. What do you miss most about Parliament, the House of Commons, the government spell you had? What do you miss most about that Westminster part of your career?
So I'm one of the few people who was very keen to leave. I was looking forward to it.
You were glad to get out of there.
Yeah. I'd spent.
In the end,
I told them in August 2021 I wanted to leave.
Yeah.
That's when I made my decision, and then obviously I thought the election would have been a bit earlier than it was. So for me, it was a little bit weird in the sense of I'm very happy to have left. I love doing the things I do now. I loved being an MP. It was a very important part of my life. I miss some of my friends, because you see them all the time. I miss some of the cut and thrust because it's amazing how fast life changes in that place. I mean, you could be talking about something that's, terribly important at 2:00, and by 3:00, the world has literally changed. And, you then think, no, well, the things we're moaning about at 2:00, God, they look like really tiny now in comparison. So I do miss that cut and thrust. It was a wonderful part of my life, which I really loved and enjoyed. But I did want to leave. I did 14 years. And I think that's a very, very long time. I think I'm the longest serving MP in my constituency's history. I did 4 elections, so I won 4.
Wow, that is impressive. No, that is something to be proud of. This episode was brought to you by Be Digital. Be Digital support leadership teams to optimize cost and get more out of technology investments. Be Digital and the team have unrivaled expertise with technology license management and data remediation, and are therefore perfectly positioned to help prepare organizations for AI technology capability. And on the last point, Be Digital have just developed a cutting-edge AI readiness assessment, which provides tech leaders with a platform they need to make well-informed decisions about AI adoption strategy in 2024 and beyond. Go to bedigitaluk.com to find out more and get in touch. You worked across national security, welfare reform, technology policy, but just to zoom in a little bit on national security in the context of cybersecurity, okay, and the digital economy. How does the UK compare on the global stage, in your view?
So I wrote a report before I left for the government, which they very kindly named after me. So I didn't want to talk about it from a defensive point of view. I want to talk about it from an economic growth. So it's called the McPartland Review into cybersecurity as an enabler of economic growth. And the idea is to think more about how can we make it more relevant to organizations, because everyone just thinks it's defensive, it's expensive, it's irritating, it's boring, it stops you doing things. So, and it leads into how well prepared is the UK. So the UK is incredibly well prepared. We're one of the most advanced nations on the planet when it comes to cybersecurity. We're one of the most digitized economies. Ourselves and the Americans are both attacked most because of it. But it also means we're uniquely vulnerable. So the Office of Budget Responsibility did some analysis, and they estimate the successful cyber attack on the UK will cost 1.6% of GDP. Now, to pop that into context, we spend just over 2% on our armed forces. So if you think about the actual tens of billions that we're talking about just from one successful cyber attack that can be repeated every couple of days or week, you can see how vulnerable we are. And anybody who's listening to this, for example, who's in London, if they were to lose their mobile phone, they probably wouldn't be able to get home. They probably wouldn't be able to buy much in the shops. I mean, the current government is talking about trying to make shops accept cash because so many of them just just don't accept cash anymore in parts of London and places like that. So we are uniquely vulnerable as a highly digitized society. So in some ways, even though we're massively prepared, it's because we're even more vulnerable. So one of the things that became very, very clear when I was doing the review was that most small businesses have very little basic cyber hygiene or cyber security. And most people be like, oh, well, it's only small business. What does it matter? Well, there's two reasons why it matters. So the first is that over 99% of all businesses in the UK are classified as small businesses. So we've just agreed that over 99% of the UK's economy has very little cyber security or basic cyber hygiene. And then the second, even more important reason is you see all these big companies. So when I was a member of Parliament, you have companies like Airbus that build a third of the world's telecommunications satellites in Stevenage, but they stand on the shoulders of 4,000 small businesses. So those 4,000 small businesses provide all the components and different bits and pieces, and it goes to Airbus and they put it together. So if you want to attack Airbus and the satellites, you attack a small business in that supply chain.
Of course.
Because everything's just in time. And if you disrupt that, you then maybe stop the satellite being made in time. So maybe it misses its launch window. So maybe there's a gap in the capability. And you can just see, well, why does it matter that you hit a small business? So when the Ministry of Defence had that problem with their attack that led to the information around some of the armed forces personnel being leaked, it wasn't the Ministry of Defence that was hacked. It was a third-party payroll supplier.
Wow, okay. Yeah.
So supply chain cybersecurity is incredibly important. And when you start to think about that, the supply chains in the United Kingdom are global. So I'm a volunteer for Crest, which is a not-for-profit. I'm their first global ambassador. So it's a not-for-profit cybersecurity accreditation organisation. It only has about 420 members, elite companies providing the best of the best type of protections. The UK Foreign Office, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the Australian Foreign Office have just funded a number of CREST camps across 14 countries. And those CREST camps are cyber accelerated maturity programs. And they're essentially designed to try and help those individual countries develop their internal cybersecurity capacity and protection. So one of the other things I talk about in my speeches is that you can't really transition towards a digitized economy unless you've got some form of cybersecurity that's in country and low cost to provide solutions to those small and medium-sized companies inside countries like Egypt, Morocco, and a number of these other countries that are inside our supply chains. So although we are well prepared in many ways, in other ways we're uniquely vulnerable.
Yeah. When you think of your cybersecurity posture, you think of your own internal processes and what is directly in your control. You don't think about your supply chain or your IT assets, which is obviously part of your supply chain typically. So it's that is a really good point. And I don't know if you if you know about what we do outside of the podcast. We're an IT asset management consultancy firm. So we help organizations understand the security risk profile in their software supply chain, because they'll have products and in some case services which may present a risk from an SME who does, or from a big software company, and there may be a component to that product which presents a risk to the organization. You know, especially now, it's a minefield in light of the just crazy acceleration of AI innovation now and agentic AI, which is changing everything, Stephen, isn't it? Well, what's your thoughts on how AI throws a spanner in this works?
Well, I mean, you've got everything from AI being used in drones on the battlefield in Ukraine on both sides, and AI, managing a lot of the electronic warfare. So, we actually have AI in use in quite kinetic environments as we speak. We then, taking a step back in terms of, we both know that cybercrime is basically cybercrime as a service. And we've seen that with the attacks on the recent retailers in the UK. And I think AI is just allowing people to speed everything up, because a lot of the attacks are opportunistic, and AI is allowing them to basically put rocket boosters under those opportunistic attacks. And, what may have been taking, 100 days, they can probably do in 100 hours. So that's multiplying everything, making it much bigger and much harder. And if there is an opportunity, AI can replicate and move things on a much faster glide path, so to speak. So it gets quite difficult quite quickly.
If you were in Keir Starmer's shoes, for instance, okay, or, you win in a government minister role, what can government do at a policy level, okay, to ensure agility in terms of the way the UK deals with cybersecurity threats? What can the UK do from the top down to ensure a robust security posture for the country?
So national security is always non-political. It's just the nature of it. So I don't believe you can have true national security without good economic security to essentially, one, pay for it, and two, so that you are actually in a position to help if there is a problem. So there's a lot of organisations out there who, once there is a challenge, they roll into action and they can help. One of the recommendations of my review was around cyber securing supply chains. And the government is taking forward a piece of legislation which is essentially going to say that critical national infrastructure has to look towards cyber securing their supply chains. So there is a lot of work going on in this area, but at the end of the day, it still comes down to over 99% of businesses in the UK are SMEs. And, everybody's got a responsibility to be looking at what they can and can't do. And to pop into context, there's some statistics that get bandied around, and there's a suggestion that around 60% of businesses that survive a cyber attack actually still go bust within 12 months. And that's because they just never recover from the cash flow. So one of the things I talked about was that cyber security was seen as an IT issue, not as a board level issue. But essentially, boards understand financial risk and regulatory risk, but they don't understand cyber risk. So, and that's incumbent on us inside our industry. So I essentially say that, we need to be explaining to boards about how, the cyber risk has this financial or regulatory risk. We need to explain it through. We need to talk about, well, if you're investing in these products or doing this is your return on investment. And that's why I wanted to talk about cybersecurity as an enabler of economic growth. Because if we say to businesses, look, you're really interested in doing some stuff around AI, but essentially we've got to protect our customers' data. We need to cyber secure the data that's going into the language models, because if I manipulate that data going in, I can manipulate the answer coming out. So we need to do that. But instead of doing that, people are just rushing towards AI. And it's like, essentially, well, people like quality, they like reassurance, they like robustness. And if you're a company that's providing to your customers, whether they're bigger businesses or the general public, a very robust and resilient service that they can trust, there's economic value there. And I think that we need to start thinking about cybersecurity as being, well, when everything else happens, we're the ones you can rely on.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was obviously something that you emphasised in the McPartland review then.
Yeah, it's one of the things that came out of it, because a lot of it was around listening. So, I put 28 roundtables together with over 300 businesses and different organisations across everything. Every sector you can imagine, from online dating to pharmaceuticals and logistics.
Online dating is an interesting one, isn't it? Because people, are a lot more emotional and will put forward information that they may not put forward in a professional environment, or.
This is why I got them involved, because essentially what happens is people accept different levels of cyber risk. So I've never done online dating, but I understand that people who do provide more information about themselves. So they provide more information about themselves than they would normally do in their professional life, as you say. But what they don't appreciate is, with AI and hostile state actors, they're collecting and harvesting all this information and then marrying it up. So just because you think you've been secure here, you've not been secure there, and then they match the two together alongside a lot of other information, and the AI models can, build these profiles quite quickly. So a classic example is, if you're next time in a room full of cyber professionals, have them in an area where there's very little phone reception and free Wi-Fi. And then halfway through your speech, just say to them, as a bunch of cyber professionals, can all those raise their hand who have access to free Wi-Fi? Yeah. And, they will. Because about a third to half of them will go on the free Wi-Fi, because they're prepared to accept more cyber risk, because they want to stay in touch with their family, or get this latest email or something else. So depending on their situation, they will accept more or less cyber risk. And I'm very interested in the human aspect of that.
Yeah, certainly. So can I just ask you another question about the McPartland review then? So I understand, obviously, we've talked a little bit about enhancing supply chain security, resilience to economic strategy, integrating cyber resilience into economic strategies and things like that. But what about, I understand you talked about fostering a skilled cyber workforce in the UK. Are your recommendations playing out in a progressive way? How far are we away from where you think we need to be based on what the research you did for this review?
I mean, I didn't want to do anything that required a law change because I've done a lot of that over the years. And I know how hard it is and how binary it is. And then it's sort of like the Computer Misuse Act. Once you've got something in place, it sounds great at the time, but in 10, 20 years later, everybody hates it because, that's the law. And then to make a change, it's not amending something, you'll change the law and it becomes quite difficult. So I think on the skills agenda, there's been a huge amount of work that's gone on over the years, pushing lots of people into these industries. And the actual industry itself, it's almost doubling in size every 5 or 6 years. So in terms of actual workforce, as well as economic growth and contributions to the economy. So it's actually, we did some economic modelling inside the review, which is available. And it's amazing, the actual growth there. The challenge we have is people, like everything, you need to have the skills that people want. So a lot of people want to be told, if you go and do these courses, you'll get this job and then this can be your career. And I think that's the bit that's not particularly developed at the moment because it's a new industry in many ways. The career development's not really there in that sense. So what tends to happen is people come in. And oddly enough, the technical skills at the entry levels are quite high. One of the challenges is the communication skills. And then on the higher levels, mid-management upwards, the challenges they have is they don't really understand what it is you're telling them. So communication is actually really quite key. So it's not just good enough to have the technical skills. And cybersecurity, when I was talking about it, if you think of your company, you're in the cybersecurity industry, but you've got people who are business development, who are involved in marketing, who are accountants, who do human resources. And we need to be talking about it as, it's not just a bunch of very technical people on computers. It's actually a big old industry. And it touches every other industry in the UK. So it's one of those big ones that actually has a massive outreach and you can step in and out of it. So you could work inside your company and then work inside a different company. It doesn't have to be just within the same industry. So I think there's a narrative issue as well, which we've got to get around that, if you go into cyber, you're sort of pigeonholed and stuck for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, if you go into cyber, people think you're a sort of cloaks and daggers sort of investigative cyber.
You hoodie up and
MI5 job, but it's really not like that, is it? It's a massive industry. And I've heard you talk in the past about your desire to help position the UK as a global leader in cyber.
Yeah, we should be a global cybersecurity superpower because we're already out there helping lots of countries. We've got the technical capability here. We have lots of people if you actually just think of the children right now in our country, they're all technically savvy.
Yep. Yeah, of course.
I mean,
absolutely.
It's just we have generations of people who are used to technology. It's just a part of their life, and there's very few countries that have the amounts of people that we actually have who are that comfortable with technology.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's crazy, isn't it? What are you most excited about in terms of large language models and agentic AI, Stephen?
So I always give the example of people are scared of AI. I think it's going to get rid of lots of jobs and everything else. But I just think of it, we need to reframe the narrative again. I love narrative. And I think, if you think of AI like the combustion engine, so when the combustion engine came along, it essentially got rid of horses and it damaged a lot of jobs in, I imagine, livery stables and all the supply chain that made it possible to actually, be transported around on horses. But that combustion engine, it didn't just get rid of horses. What it did is it led eventually to powering rockets to take satellites into space, which now power the telecommunications and everything we do in terms of modern society. So that combustion engine sort of led to modern society.
Of course, yeah. And the automotive industry, which is one of the biggest employers in the world in the late 20th century, wasn't it? So
yeah, but that was only one small part of it, because if you think about the opportunities it led to,
of course,
air travel, everything. So essentially, that's what I think about AI. I think AI is this huge opportunity to be like the combustion engine, where it can go off and create lots and lots of different jobs and opportunities and industries. But what we've got to be better at, and cybersecurity can help with this, what we've got to be better at is the people who lose the jobs along the way, is retraining them. And if we're able to retrain people who are losing the jobs along the way on AI into industries like cybersecurity, that will actually, one, get rid of the workforce gap, but two, it allows people to continue to progress and move forward. And I think that's something we've always been pretty rubbish at when it comes to Western economies. And we need to put a bit more thought into that. We need to be thinking 10 years in advance of, we're training people in universities for jobs now, but more the actual jobs of the future.
I agree. I mean, you're obviously a fellow history graduate, Stephen. You may have studied the time of the Industrial Revolution and the Luddites, when they used to destroy machinery in protest of them taking jobs. And then, we all know, like at every point in history when there's a technology innovation, there's a net positive, there's a net gain in jobs eventually. Yeah. Maybe not initially, but eventually. And I think I agree. I do think this may be a little bit different. I think the interim period may be a bit more painful, but I think eventually we'll see new industries, new vocations, new everything. I'm really optimistic about that. But can I ask you about the inner workings of the civil service and public sector in the UK? Do you think, what's your view on how AI and automation can impact the civil service and the public sector in the UK? Do you have any use cases that you think it could add an enormous amount of value? Do you think it's going to take a lot, because there's a lot of people working in public sector who've got jobs which can be easily automated? Do you have a view on that?
It's very difficult, because I think one of the things that I've talked about is digital exclusion. So if you think about some of my friends we've done conferences with when it comes to finances, and if you're trying to apply for a bank account now, it's pretty much done online. If you don't quite fit the criteria, the computer says no. And so there are some people who are essentially being excluded from financial products because they don't quite fit.
100%.
Now, if you have some learning disabilities or some other issues with your life, I mean, I was a politically exposed person, so I can't quite pass any of the online banking checks. I need at some point to speak to a human.
Really? Okay.
It's incredibly frustrating. So I think you've got to make sure that you're not excluding those, especially those with disabilities, because I think that is one of the problems around the computer says no. So when it comes to automation, it's got to be done in a sensitive way. And as you know, the model is only as good as the information that goes in. Yeah. So if you're going to be automating a number of these jobs, you've got to make sure that you've done a really good job of getting that information in, because the computer's not going to have any hopes or dreams or ambitions. It's just going to spit the answer out. And I think that is something that we have to be very conscious of. So, if you've got somebody who's passed recently and the computer just sends you quite a snotty letter with a tax demand, that's not going to be acceptable in our society. But for the computer, it's like, well, they owe the tax. It doesn't have emotions or feelings. And I think, although you can automate a number of these jobs, I think what you need to be thinking about doing is automating processes. So where can you remove some of the manual stuff? Where can you use it to actually stop people falling down the cracks? Where could you actually use it to be helping and identifying some of those who are excluded? I think when people talk about it, they're always looking for this big bang, this big piece of productivity kick, but it's only on this bit here. And I think its real application, its real benefit will be, it's very expensive for a human to be, dealing with this one or two things over here when, they could do that 500 there quite quickly. But it won't be expensive for AI to be finding those one or two things over there and then flagging it up for the human. And I think that's how we're going to start thinking about it. We need to be thinking about it slightly differently.
So tell us a little bit about your involvement in the payment space and especially cryptography. I understand you're a chairman of a company called TrustPay. How did that come about, and what exactly is, what problem are they trying to solve?
That's something that I only do a little bit. It's advisory chairman more than actual chairman type of thing. And that was more about trying to think about developing building a business-to-business crypto solution. So for me, I'm still looking at finding a interesting piece of technology that could work with a robust solution whereby you're actually sending something from a stable inflationary economy like the UK towards a high inflationary economy. So, because obviously those businesses who may be your suppliers don't want to be paid in local currency because it's probably devalued by 10% in those, 2 or 3 months, or maybe even faster.
Because of the volatility, yeah.
Yeah, and if you because of high inflation in those countries. Turkey had high inflation, Argentina's had high inflation. I mean, I think Argentina had over 100%, it was over 100% and stuff like that. So, it's devaluing by 10% a month. So if you then pay them in US dollars, sometimes in some countries, they're not really democracies. They're not really as open as we are. And they have certain organizations that will go around and shake them down because they know they have hard currency. So some of those suppliers don't also want to be paid in like US dollars or UK pound sterling. And so it was like, for me, thinking, well, how can you do that? Because the advantage of some crypto is, if they were to, when you make the transaction, there's a link of where it's gone to, isn't there? So
the place on the blockchain it's a public ledger essentially, isn't it?
Yeah. So you'd know that these interesting organisations inside some of these companies were essentially nicking it all, and then and then that would mean in the UK, for example, there'd be certain laws that would be, well, you can't transact with that supplier now because that country's interesting organisation is not something that we're prepared to be involved with. That was the interest there, but and I'm still looking at something for that, because I think that is going to be a big space going forward in the payment system. I just think, it's not quite married up yet in the UK. It's not trusted very much. And I think there's a big opportunity there. I've got some ideas. And, maybe some of your listeners want to talk to me. Maybe there's something that could be moved forward a bit more, because I think that is going to be something that will happen quite a lot. The second thing I'm very interested in is post-quantum cryptography. So that's very much around RSA is being depreciated by NIST by 2030, and it'll be disallowed by 2035. So this is very much, most encryption is based on RSA at the moment. So this is very much, if you're a big bank, TikTok in 5 years' time, you're not supposed to be using this. And those guys are going to be sitting there thinking, what's this guy talking about? And it's you're going to be paying lots of noughts very, very soon, because the closer you get to it, the bigger the challenge it's going to be. So you need to be thinking about it now. And, essentially, what this is Mosca's theorem was that by 2030, there was a 1 in 2 chance that a quantum computer type activity would break one of these encryptions. Once that's done, because of AI, everything's done. So, the reality is everything's probably done in a week. So while everyone's scrabbling around trying to come up with a solution, it's too late. Everybody's reading everything. And, there are certain organizations out there collecting all the emails and other bits and pieces of information in the hope that when there is this type of solution, they can go back and read them all. So lots of information is being harvested, and AI, and then some of these quantum-based solutions will be used to go back and then find anything interesting for them. So that's going to be quite interesting going forward. So post-quantum cryptography is about how do you identify your encryption vulnerabilities in a quantum-type atmosphere, and then how do you actually go off and prioritize the areas you need to actually fix first. And then how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Funnily enough, an ex-guest of the podcast, a gentleman called Simon Phillips, who's his background is game development, but he got into the quantum space and he runs a firm in Reading, and they are working with government departments right now on R&D around quantum capability for government purposes.
Oh yeah, so the first government quantum strategy was published back in 2014 with billions of pounds behind it. The second one was published in 2024 with billions behind it. And I think, I'm trying to remember, it's something weird like something like 15% of all private equity investments in quantums in the UK.
Really?
globally.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
so it's a big hub then.
We're top 3 for quantum in the world. So we are...
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we're basically quantum leaders. But I mean, we've always been great at cryptography. Bletchley Park was the start of it, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, Alan Turing. I mean, yeah, of course, I suppose you could argue that is the sort of, that was the sort of birth of modern cryptography, I suppose, wasn't it? But so in terms of quantum, I was going to say, one thing, people talk about quantum cryptography in relation to the Bitcoin network as a specific instance of, can quantum computing crack the Bitcoin, create vulnerabilities in the Bitcoin network? And the way I was the rebuttal I heard was, you got some of the smartest people in the world constantly protecting the Bitcoin network. And the minute that quantum becomes a possibility, it'll just, the red team and blue team will be fighting it out. And you know what I mean? The robustness of networks like the Bitcoin network will just keep up by having a quantum layer. You know what I mean? So it's unlikely that quantum will be able to infiltrate a network like the Bitcoin network or whatever other network we're trying to protect, So hopefully that'll be the case.
Bitcoin's quite an interesting thing because if you're British like us, you probably have Bitcoin because it's an investment. And you never sell it because you think it's going to be worth millions. So you just sit there holding it like a stocks and share. And then if you're Russian, you use it to buy stuff like we use our Apple Pay. So I always find Bitcoin super interesting because British people use it as investments and other people use it as a currency to transact.
Well, it's legal tender in El Salvador, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's they use them in Israel in taxis.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, they don't take credit cards, but they take Bitcoin.
No way! I did not know that. Wow. Well, look, it's the biggest computer network in the world.
Yeah.
The compute power combined, it's definitely catching on. The price has gone up year on year for the last 15 years or whatever, however long it's been going.
Bitcoin on its own is about 50% of the valuation of all cryptocurrencies because there's tens of thousands of them. But Bitcoin's the one that people do it. But I think its challenges, it's so volatile. So as I say, British people use it as an investment and other people use it as legal tender.
Yeah, sure. We talked about what you're most excited about in terms of the proliferation of AI capability and innovation. What are you most fearful of?
I don't like fear. I like to be positive and hopeful. And I spent my whole life doing that. So there are 2 things I'd be concerned about rather than fearful about. So one is digital exclusion, because on the AI, you make digital exclusion 1 billion times worse because whatever you do, the computer says no a lot faster than you can do anything. And you're literally just locked out. So that does concern me a great deal because I think all the models would be saying the same thing and spitting the same results out. And I think people would not really have anywhere to go or anything to do. And when I was a member of Parliament, the people who turn up in my surgeries, they'd fell through the cracks and all these organisations couldn't quite help them because it wasn't quite their problem. And I think AI might push that out on steroids. So I think exclusion, whether it's digital exclusion, financial exclusion or anything, I think as AI gets used more and more, people will start finding they don't quite fit faster and faster. So they'd all end up a bit like your mother-in-law, 80 years old, but they wouldn't be 80 and it wouldn't be a choice. It'd just be life said now. So
yeah, of course,
that makes me slightly concerned. And then the second thing is, a bit more depressing, and that is essentially the rules of engagement when it comes to if you're using a drone with a kinetic effect. What is the rules of engagement for AI? Because you essentially got computers fighting each other. Are you prepared to accept what level of, they call it, collateral damage to, take a target out? Because AI is not going to, register that, that might be a school. The human would recognize it was the school. And it'd be like, Did you see what I mean?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, AI for warfare is terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. So for me, it's it's how do we get the models to understand, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and how do you define a school? It doesn't have to say school on it. It could be, in some of these countries where this stuff's happening, it could be somebody just teaching a few children.
Well, and anywhere that contains children or innocent not non sort of military civilians, essentially.
Yeah, because they can only really do what they're told. So that, how do you define innocence? If I said to you now, I'll write down what innocence is and this and that. So that makes me a bit fearful that the computer would be making a decision rather than the human.
The blurred lines as well. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay, let's finish on this one, Stephen. Looking back on your career, 21-year-old Stephen McPartland, who's just about to enter politics, what advice would you give to that guy? And maybe you can finish off by saying where people can get hold of you and reach out to you, etc.
Okay. So I was 22 doing a Master of Science in Technology, and I wanted to be a Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer. I think I did a little bit with computers, and there was not many people involved in it. In those days, you were just sort of left on your own. And I think I would say follow your heart and follow your dreams. I think that's what I've always done. And I've had a wonderful life and found a lot of amusement. It's been stressful in some places. But looking back, there's very little I would change. I'd probably make most of the decisions that I made. And I'd probably pretty much be on the same path I was on. So I think looking back, I'm quite happy. Genuinely quite happy. I'm quite lucky.
Yeah, well, very philosophical, but yeah, I completely understand. That's amazing.
You asked about how people can contact me, so I'm on LinkedIn as the Right Honourable Stephen McPartland. LinkedIn's probably the easiest place to find me. One final thing we didn't cover is I have a little not-for-profit called Green Cyber. Okay. I'm going to be launching that a bit more effectively in the next few months, and that's how do you cyber secure the green technology required as you transition towards a net zero economy. And the second aspect of it is how do you think about making more energy efficient cybersecurity. So there'll be no doubt lots more to hear about that in the future.
Absolutely. So we'll put a link on about that on the show notes, along with the other things you've mentioned as well. Stephen, thank you so much. It's been a very insightful and just a brilliant conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
That was fab. So much insight, so candid, so happy to talk about anything I threw at him. I wasn't trying to catch him out or anything, but I think he just gave so much back when I asked him sort of more closed questions. He even gave me a lot back, which is a dream for an interviewer. So really interesting what he talked about, sharp decision makers and intelligence and resilience for senior ministers. And I think it was after I asked him about Boris Johnson that he obviously emphasised that the magnitude of the decisions these senior ministers have to make and then justify those decisions in a public domain, in the House of Commons, in mainstream media outlets like the BBC and things, and just have to deal with so much scrutiny and so much criticism. It really takes a certain type of person to deal with that, and that's a really interesting point. But I think what stood out for me, and what the one thing I'd like to emphasise on the whole, thinking back now, was the supply chain part that Stephen was talking about, which is obviously a part of the McPartland review. One of the findings is that a lot of organizations have got vulnerabilities in their supply chain, and how much of a critical factor that is in building your security posture as a business leader. His example of an attack on a small third-party provider, supplier, causing disruption to a major company like Airbus, who I believe are a big employer in Stephen's old constituency. But it shows that cyber attackers don't go straight for the fortress, they go for the weakest link, and that often lies in the supply chain. So if you're not securing your entire supply chain, you're leaving yourself exposed. It's a powerful reminder your cybersecurity posture is only ever as strong as the most vulnerable part, as the weakest link. Okay, so that was just one of many things I could have emphasized. It was a brilliant episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a subscribe, leave a review, share it with someone you know. Any bit of engagement really helps us. We've got some incredible guests coming on over the summer, so please keep an eye on our feed. And yeah, I hope to see you again soon. This episode was brought to you by Be Digital. Be Digital support leadership teams to optimize cost and get more out of technology investments. Be Digital and the team have unrivaled expertise with technology license management and data remediation, and are therefore perfectly positioned to help prepare organizations for AI technology capability. And on the last point, Be Digital have developed a cutting-edge AI readiness assessment, which provides tech leaders with a platform they need to make well-informed decisions about AI adoption strategy in 2024 and beyond. Go to Be Digital UK to find out more and get in touch.